When I found out that Platinum Games, one of my favorite developers, was making a game for The Legend of Korra, a show that I really like, I was pretty excited. Generally, if we're talking about tie-in games, movie, show, tie-ins, whatever, they're generally not all that great. But I was thinking, this is from a really good developer, the style of bending from the show could definitely work well with their style. Unfortunately, it really is just kind of another throwaway tie-in game. It's decently fun, it has some good moments, and I could actually recommend it to people who are both big fans of Legend of Korra and Platinum Games, but it has a lot of problems, and by the time I finished the game, the problems definitely left more of an impact on me than the positives did. First of all, the story. There really isn't one. There's an old guy, he's evil, and you've got to stop him. At the beginning of the game, he blocks Korra's chi, taking away all of her bending. Just one of the most overused video game story tropes out there. You're powerful at the beginning, then you instantly lose all your powers, have to get them back one by one. You don't really interact with anybody. Korra's pretty much the only character present. Jinora shows up sometimes, but for very brief moments, just to tell you some things. Mako and Bolin are in it for about 10 seconds, and that's about it. She doesn't really interact with anybody. It's just, go stop the evil guy. Because. And the areas that you go through aren't really interesting either. It's Air Temple Island, a pretty normal-looking place, just the city, some snowy places. There's nothing really interesting about any of the environments, any of the places that you traverse. At least the game itself looks pretty good. The animation in the cutscenes are nice. It doesn't look like the same quality as the show, but for a $15 game, you don't expect it to. It was nice seeing something that at least somewhat resembled the show, and the look during gameplay was nice too, a nice cel-shaded kind of look. All the bending looked really cool. I at least liked the way everything looked. I just wish there had been more varied designs for the environments and for the enemies. There's really very few types of enemies. Most of them are just reskins, recolorings with tiny little differences. Even some of the bigger boss enemies, a lot of them are just the same enemies encountered over and over again. The gameplay is a pretty simple button mashing beat 'em up, something you'd expect from Platinum Games, except lighter, a light version of some of their better hack and slash games. And of course, I can't totally fault it for that. It is a $15 game. It's just a downloadable small game, but it has a lot of problems. There are only 2 buttons for attacking, so at the beginning it's very repetitive when you don't have your bending at all, or when you only have one type of bending. It gets better as it goes along. You unlock more styles of bending and more combos, but at the beginning it's definitely extremely repetitive, and some of the elements you unlock pretty late into the game, like past the halfway mark. So by that point, it kind of feels like it's too late. It would feel like it would have been better to just have all of your elements available at the beginning and be able to level them up and change them a lot as you went through, instead of just doing the stupid strip you of all your powers at the beginning and get them back one by one thing. As you use the different styles of bendings, they will level up individually. You'll be able to increase your chi bar or your health bar, or unlock new combos. You can also buy new combos at the shop. You get spirit energy for defeating enemies and just breaking things in the environment, which you can use to buy things like new combos or new items, health potions, stuff like that. Or items that do more, like increasing your health but having your attack, or vice versa. However, once you buy the item that slowly regenerates your health over time, and by slowly I mean pretty quickly, it becomes very easy from that point on, and you can buy that early on. That's the first thing that I bought. It was definitely more difficult early on, which, since it was also more repetitive early on, is not really a good thing. Once you buy that item, and once you unlock more bending styles, considering air bending is extremely overpowered and it has a huge range of effect, it becomes pretty easy towards the end. So the beginning is difficult just because of your limited moveset, and the ending is much easier, but it still has its annoyances. The difficulty is gone, so you're not feeling challenged anymore. The camera sometimes gets all crazy and all over the place, and you can't see what's going on, especially when there are maybe some big enemies, several of them on the screen at the same time. And the counter button is extremely finicky, and you have to be extremely precise. You can press the right trigger to just dodge out of the way, left trigger blocks, and if you press it at the right time when an enemy is attacking you, you'll counter them. And a lot of bosses, you really have to do counters. You have to use counters because your normal attacks do very little damage to them, but you have to be so precise with them, it's really hard to pull off a lot of the time. And those very same bosses also have a lot of uncounterable moves, so you're just sitting there waiting for them to use that move for who knows how long, because it seems to be kind of random, and then when they finally do it, you go to counter, and it's so precise that you mess it up and you gotta wait for them to do it again. There are a decent amount of different moves and combos that you can unlock, but I would have liked to see more. I would have liked to see more different kind of attacks that you see in the show, and also mixing together the different bending styles. You can do that. You can switch between them pretty easily in mid-combo, but nothing too spectacular there. I would have liked to have seen a lot more reason to vary your attack style. There aren't even enemies that are resistant to certain elements. You'd think that would be a given in a game like this. You'd think there would be enemies where you have to use a certain element, or you can't use a certain element on them, but there's not. They do have their different uses. Water bending is good for projectile attacks long distance, earth is really powerful for close-up fighting, air has a good area of effect, and fire's there. Fire doesn't really have a specific use, it's just basic melee combat. It's cool, it's fun, it works, but it's just there. But really, you can get away with just using one type of bending. Once you unlock air, it's extremely powerful, and you can just stick with that, except when you need to switch to projectile water attacks for some of the faraway enemies. But there's just not enough incentive and enough reason to really vary your attacks. Speaking of which, it really does come down to button mashing a lot of the time. I found in a lot of battles, when I was trying to counter or use my heavy attacks, it ended up just being easier to just mash the square button over and over again, because some of the enemies, they just wouldn't give you enough time to do the heavier attacks, and the countering just didn't work half the time. So I ended up just mashing square, and then I would win. Same with the pro bending matches, another thing I was really excited about, because ever since I saw pro bending in the show, I'm like, oh, if they ever make a Korra game, there better be pro bending. It was announced that it would be in this game. I got excited. It's pretty basic, it's nothing too bad, but when I first started doing it, I was trying to counter, I was trying to use my heavy attack, switch things up, and I was losing. So I started just mashing square, and just dodging, and that's when I started winning. Aside from the pro bending, there's also another little mini game. It's kind of an endless runner, temple run type thing, where you ride on Naga, riding through the streets and the snowy mountains and wherever, collecting little spirit energy orbs on the way, and they're not too bad, at least not at first, but they go on for too long, and there's too many of them. There's only like 3 or 4, but that's too many. And one of them culminates in this terrible battle sequence while you're still on Naga, and it was just horrible. And one of the big reasons it was horrible was because, I don't know if this just happened to me, I feel like it did because I haven't seen anybody else mention it in other reviews that I've read. For me, waterbending kinda didn't work half the time. Not in combat. In combat it was fine, but for whatever reason I feel like my game was glitching out. There are certain barriers in the game that you can only break with certain elements. So you get to a water barrier, and you use water attacks on it, and it breaks. There's a chest with a barrier around it, you use water bending on it, it breaks. Same with fire, earth, air, whatever. And as you can see, I've broken some barriers for earth and fire, broke relatively quickly, but watch as I try to destroy the water barrier. For whatever reason, water just kinda stopped working here. There was one chest where I had to shoot projectile water attacks at it, and it just wouldn't work. I gave up and I walked away. During that Naga segment where you're battling the mechs, you can use your elements for attacks in that segment. Square does a fireball attack, X does an earth jump type thing, and circle does a water shield. I do the fire attacks, I do the earth jump, press circle, the water shield doesn't happen. I can't defend. That made it a lot harder because the game wasn't working. Water just stopped working for me outside of combat. So, beware that that might happen, I guess. Sometimes in the middle of combat, a QuickTime event will come up where you have to move the analog sticks in a certain direction, but it just kind of happens suddenly in the middle of combos. So you're moving, you're in the middle of a combo, and then that shows up suddenly, or a circle press to finish the enemy, but you're in the middle of a combo, and that just suddenly shows up for 1 second, and you don't have time to react to it, and you don't accomplish it because you're still trying to do your combo. The game's about 4 hours long. It has some side paths in there that you can find and search for, which lead you to chests that have some items in them, and sometimes they're nice little collectible items that harken back to the show, Korra, or Last Airbender, and that's just nice. A nice little thing to add in there for fans. I thought those items were kind of cool. There are the elemental barriers and elemental chests that you might have to go back to previous levels to get after you unlock that type of bending later on. There's also the pro bending mode, where you can rise up through the bending league or whatever. There's the extreme difficulty unlocked after you beat it on normal. And you can try to get a platinum medal. You can try going through the levels again to try and get a higher score, essentially, on each one. But after I beat the game, I really had no desire to play it anymore. After I unlocked a new bending element, I thought, oh, there was that fire barrier from before. I have firebending now. I could go back and get that, see what was behind there. I didn't want to. I didn't even honestly really want to finish the game, but I did. There is fun to be had. The combat can be fun. But it just has a lot of problems. The combat had a lot of problems, like I've described, and there just wasn't enough variety to it. The pro bending, I felt like, had problems and just wasn't anything interesting. The Naga running segments would have been okay if there was only one or two and they were half as long. And with the story not being interesting and not really having any kind of charm or a real feel that the show brings, there's just not a ton to it. There is some fun to be had with the combat, and like I said, if you are a fan of Platinum games, or this style of beat 'em up, and also a fan of Legend of Korra, then yeah, I'd recommend at least giving it a shot, because that's what I did. I decided to give it a shot because I am a fan of those things, and there is some fun to be had. You might even value just the fact that you're playing as Korra and doing this bending over those issues. But those issues are there, and for me personally, the negatives outweighed the positives, and it just wasn't a very good or memorable experience for me. I would mostly just recommend waiting a couple days for Platinum's next real game to come out, Bayonetta 2. But if you have played the Legend of Korra game, let me know what you thought about it. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Let me know down in the comments below. If you haven't played it, are you looking forward to it? Are you still going to give it a shot? It's available for pretty much all systems, except for Wii U, PS3, PS4, Xbox 360, Xbox One, and PC. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed, subscribe if you'd like to see more. I'll see you guys in the next one.